I also studied urban planning in undergrad as well. So that's awesome.
So Kristy, what do you study now, or what are you doing now?
Oh yeah, I look like I'm like 16, but no, I'm like actually way older than that. I graduated from UC Berkeley. I studied I studied urban planning and environmental policy at Berkeley. I'm sure I'm going to be doing this intro again, but yeah, maybe we'll just wait until I introduce myself. You'll learn about what I do very soon.
Of course.
But we should also have like our own conversation outside of this. I'll definitely.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, like when you go to any conference, some of the coolest stuff happens out in the hallway outside where the main speakers
are. Like the only chats we have. It's like, let's do like outside Zoom chats and emails, but we'll make it happen.
Yeah. So what are you doing, Rose?
I am the moderator for today. I am a master's in public health candidate at the University of Alabama at Birmingham.
Oh, great.
Yes.
A lot of public health issues there in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, stay safe.
Thank you.
In a way, I mean, I do a lot of work with indigenous communities down in the Amazon, and what we're dealing with now is normal. I mean, we just never think about it. But when you think about how one of the communities I work with went from several hundred people down to less than 80 people because of measles just 70 years ago, and now they're back up to 600. But this, punctuated equilibrium they're dealing with, they all of a sudden, they all get wiped out and they kind of come, we've got to deal with that. I mean, yellow fever, all these things have shaped world history forever. I mean, the U.S., Revolutionary War was shaped by these diseases. All the big events have been shaped by these diseases. We just think, oh my God, this is so new. Is somebody letting all these people in?
Yes, we are.
I don't want to be ungracious, but I'm not letting anybody in.
Oh, no, it's all good. We are waiting on one more panelist.
As a multiracial, it's so fascinating to see all these names that were from different languages, different cultural groups. And I guess we're not going to see everybody's faces, but so Rose, you're going to keep us to this 2-minute directive here.
I'm going to do my best. I will say I'm a little worried about being soft because I want to hear everything that you all say. And so I will try not to cut anyone off. But yes, that being said, I will do my best.
That's okay. In my case, if you feel you need to unplug me. I can always come back and talk more in Q&A. Professors are notorious for doing those kinds of things anyway. We get paid to talk, right?
Yes. Well, we are still waiting on one more speaker, but we can go ahead and get started. And then when he comes, then we can have him introduce himself as well. So thank you everyone so much for joining us today for our panel about Asian American and Pacific Islander voices on environmental justice. My name is Rose Albert, and I'm a master's in public health candidate at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And I'm so excited to be joined by some amazing panelists this morning. So can we get started with our discussion about social and environmental justice, human rights concerns of American and Asian American and Pacific Islander populations. So Kristy, can you start us off with some introductions about yourself and some of the work you're involved in?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Kristy Drutman. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently based on Muncie Lenape land, otherwise known as the New Jersey, New York area. And some things about me. I graduated from UC Berkeley. I studied urban planning and environmental policy. I identify as a Jewish and Filipino American, and I am the host and founder of my multimedia platform called Brown Girl Green, which is focused on both environmental advocacy as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion in the environmental field. And so I create podcasts, blogs, Instagram graphics, memes, videos, all of the above to teach people about the climate crisis and teach about how it's specifically disproportionately impacting Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And, the reason why I wanted to be in this panel is to specifically talk about, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders who aren't necessarily always brought into the conversation around environmental justice. And I really wanted to have an opportunity to talk about the importance of storytelling around our community in this space. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Dr. Ding, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, of course, and thank you, Rose. And good morning. Great to see so many people care about AAPI's voice in the health and environmental justice issues. And my name is Hongbin Ding. Today is Saturday, so I'm wearing my community hat. My community hat is I'm a vice chair of Maryland Governor's Commission on Asian American and Pacific Islanders Affairs Commission. And this commission consists of 21 members representing Asian American communities in the state of Maryland. And we basically represent the voices of the Asian American community, and really depends on what's the common concern. If a community have grave concerns about the job opportunity, then probably in that year of time, our discussion will be focused on job opportunity, culture, health, and environment. Of course, obviously, in the last 18 months, the number one issue in everybody's mind is, well, COVID. And COVID, my presentation later will be more or less about COVID, the whole COVID-19 situation, and what the key lessons we have learned based on our experiences in the state of Maryland. And on the other hand, my daytime job, Monday to Friday role is that I'm a business professor. I'm the associate dean of Loyola University, Maryland. The university is in Baltimore. And my research area is entrepreneurship and sustainability. That's where I start to set foot in the world of environmental justice and the environmental issues. So it's a great pleasure to meet new friends, connect with so many new faces. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Mr. Nash?
Hi, my name is Phil Tajitsu Nash. You can just call me Phil. My pronouns are he and him. I'm here on the land of the Piscataway people, also known as the Washington, D.C. area. I teach at the University of Maryland in Asian American Studies. I'm an affiliate with the Latin American Studies because I do a lot of work down in the Brazilian Amazon. My wife is an anthropologist who is really more of a community activist. And so we've been helping to preserve the land and culture and languages of some indigenous communities there. In my work with Asian American communities, I also am the co-president of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, which is up in New York City and does work around the country around voting rights and anti-Asian violence and a lot of other issues. And I have personally been involved with environmental issues my whole life. Actually, it's interesting, when I was invited to this panel, I said, gee, I'm not really doing environmental work per se, but then I thought about it. And a lot of what ALDF does that I'll be talking about later is stuff relating to land use and anti-gentrification and other things. So actually it is related to the stuff our other panelists are going to be talking about. So again, thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here with these distinguished co-panelists.
Thank you so much. I'm already excited to hear about how everyone's hats overlapped with everyone else's. So we'd like to first open the floor to highlight your experiences and thoughts on fighting for AAPI populations. So what are some challenges that you've encountered in your human rights, social justice, and environmental justice work? So I'll turn it back over to you, Phil.
Thanks. There are 4 key problems that you have no matter what you're trying to do to make the world better. I mean, there's time, resources, knowledge, and skills. And, you can riff off of that. There are other things as well, but, we all have a one human lifetime that we're allotted, and we have to figure out how we're going to spend it. And basically, one of my neighbors who just passed away at age 95, he had written in his thing and said he left the world better than he found it. And I thought, gee, given a guy who had so many things that he did in the course of his lifetime, that's what he wanted written on his program. And I think that's probably a good way all of us can be aspiring, no matter what our religion or background or philosophy. But these challenges I have seen as a lawyer and as a community activist, because whenever you see a big problem, you need to confront it in a way that is strategic, but also tactical. You have to be able to look at the small pieces and at the big pieces. You have to plan, do, reflect, and start over. Plan, do, and reflect. Keep building your little movement. And so I think these are the challenges that I've seen in every aspect of my human rights work, because I'm really a human rights person who happens to do some environmental stuff and some voting rights and some work in other areas as well. So I'll leave it there and listen to my co-panelists.
Excellent. Kristy, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, so I would say, building off of that, one of the biggest things is resources. I think specifically when it comes to AAPI populations, there's not a lot of data when it comes to environmental justice issues, even though there should be, because our community definitely is being impacted by these problems of pollution, of toxic exposure, all these things. But it's like, the data is not really well resourced. And I think that also is attributed to not a lot of Asian Americans pursuing higher education in the environmental space and not really being supported there either. And so that's not like a research priority to collect that data to be able to really like track that specific issue area. And the Green 2.0 report, which I always love to reference, talks about overall the lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to the distribution of resources for bringing more Black, Indigenous, and people of color into the environmental field. And we even see that now with the recent report in the philanthropy sector that I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a very small percentage of those funds are going to actual like smaller environmental justice nonprofits. And there's not a lot of diversity of who actually is on these boards of these nonprofits, of these philanthropies, actually distributing these funds. And so when you think about that, that presents all these barriers. You don't have the data and you don't have the resources or the representation to actually be able to have that be translatable to actual tangible benefits for the AAPI community. And so I just wanted to put that out there as another key point in the conversation about, where is the redistribution happening and how do we bring more people who look like us into the rooms to think about those things.
Absolutely. And those reports sound very interesting. I would love to read them because you're right, those are very important barriers. Dr. Ding, would you like to take this question?
Well, yes, of course. I would like to build on Kristy's point. The big challenge to the AAPI community is, to me, is that we don't really have enough conversation among ourselves. Sure, we also need conversations with communities outside of AAPI, but let me explain what I mean by within ourselves. Because if you look at the history of AAPI community in this country, it's a very long history, and the legacies of the older generations or multi-generation AAPI community in the United States, now they have a very different narrative and American dream experiences compared to, say, me. I come to the United States in 1995, and my experiences are vastly different from those AAPI immigrants come to US in the previous century or before World War II or right after World War II. And that creates a disconnection between our experiences and how we see ourselves, and it will trickle down to the public policy and resource distribution discussions. So that's a sort of longitudinal gaps between, or I should say, among ourselves. And then AAPI is a huge community. If you look at this in a cross-sectional way, then you have people from China, from Taiwan, Korea, and then people from Malaysia, Indonesia. So we are all very different. And AAPI is a very powerful concept. and it unites everyone under this umbrella. So, and as a powerful tool, it certainly serves a lot of purposes. But just as any powerful tools in the world, powerful tools also has limitations. AAPI, I think, at some point become a limitation to in terms of facilitating the conversations among ourselves to help us identify what are differences and what are the needs we have among us, and how can we work together while acknowledging the differences and move toward to a better future, say 10 years from now. So I totally understand the AAPI label. When it was created, it was new, powerful, more than half a century ago. But 2021, I'm not saying AAPI is irrelevant. It's still very powerful and very relevant and important. However, we also, after all, we need to mature this concept of AAPI to look into all around community, cross-sectionally and longitudinally. And that, to me, has been a important, a difficult challenge, because all of a sudden, I need to start to have conversations with people like me, may share some similar background, some similar AAPI experiences, American experiences, and then we have just so different perceptions about our experiences, things we see on daily basis, and what do we do from here? So I think more conversations, more structured conversations and meaningful conversations among us is timely, important, and it hopefully will address a lot of issues we are facing nowadays.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I could not agree more with that about making sure we're being very intentional and specific and direct with our language to make sure we're not just lumping everyone into a monolith and homogenizing a movement, and being as specific as possible when we're looking at the specific needs and capacities of different populations. So thank you so much for that point. For the next question, we have definitely noticed this past year an uptick in violence against AAPI populations. So the question is this violence new, and how has it changed your work on human rights, social, and environmental justice? So Kristy, if you could start us off with this question.
Yeah, I would say that, like, from my own experience, and I can only speak from my own experience, like I always like knew that there was violence happening against the community, just because of just hearing about, elders getting beaten, or like hearing about like even racism that my family's experienced. But it was like, I felt like, especially this year with everything that happened, maybe because it got more publicity, I don't know, just like something about it just felt like very like sinister and really intense. And it definitely like opened my eyes to realizing like how much I had not really looked into those issues exactly. And yeah, I think if anything, it's just made me a lot more hyper aware that like our community is not a monolith, but that we all share this like shared experience of like the different forms of violence that we face. And yeah, and it's just made me explore like also the AAPI experience with like our own forms of like anti-Blackness, and like also just like the Black community, and just like everything that just happened last year with George Floyd, and Black Lives Matter, and just understanding all these intersections about how this system and these systems of oppression that are guided by white supremacy are attacking all of us and destroying all of us in our own ways, in our own communities. And I think it really just made me like solidify that more in my mind, in the work that I'm doing, that like need to like really think about things with the language I use and the communities I engage with. It really made me think a lot deeper about that.
Absolutely. Dr. Ding?
Well, I will be the first one to admit that I was one of the person before COVID, before if we may call it an uptick of anti-Asian AAPI crimes or anti-Asian hate show up, I was one of the person who thought, well, there are always crazy people in any society. So why give the crazy people who throw race slurs on me even negative attention, right? So like babies, sometimes they are negative attention seekers. I don't want to give them any attention at all. So I just ignore them to extinction, maybe. But this past 18 months, sort of changed my mind. I changed my mind, and it's really seeing, well, so sometimes ignorance does not make bad behaviors or racism just go away. And in fact, me trying to ignore what happened, that's a very small, it has a very small impact on the overall society. If the overall society has some sort of is basically feeling these kind of narratives, language, and racial slurs, and you see those kind of things being broadcasted on social media by people holding offices and in power, then those kind of behaviors are not going to go away. In fact, they probably will grow and become worse. And then so I changed my mind. I changed my perspective during this period, and also I'm seeing a lot of the AAPI community people. They were not activists before. They actually think everything's okay, and they may be active in their community services, in their church, in their religious groups, but not really about human rights, about AAPI rights in general. But now they come up and they are saying, well, if we just keep silence, thinking ignorance will make those hates just go away. No, it's not happening, because we cannot, as individuals, unless we work together, we cannot let those kind of things go away, because social media and all these other outlets are broadcasting, almost like encouraging those kind of behaviors. And at this point, I do want to pause a little bit and say, well, sometimes I do also see maybe occasional sort of exaggerations of hate and not crime, but hate. Well, something bad happened to us. Is that exactly hate? It could be an exaggeration at times, but overall, I would say after the last 18 months, I'm happy to see that there are more people who are previously quiet or inactive, not activists, are willing to come out and engage the other AAPI, different parts of AAPI community or non-AAPI community into productive conversations, into productive working relationships, and trying to figure out and trying to improve our surroundings and the general dialogues of the society, so that after this period of, like, if we may call it, and after this uptick of anti-Asian hate period, then we can see a better future ahead of us.
Absolutely. Phil?
Just building on what Dr. Deng and Kristy said, I've been thinking about this issue my whole life. I've been teaching Asian American history for 37 years. And at the beginning, I really didn't know that much. I mean, to be honest, I was just another guy who was pre-med like every other Asian American at some point in their life. And, I was just studying, putting my nose into the books, just trying to make the best I could for myself and my family. And as I found out about my own family being in the Japanese American internment camps during World War II, looking at what was happening down in Chinatown, and then actually talking to people, seeing how they were just enduring the terrible things they had to deal with, looking at the refugees coming over here, seeing what they were enduring. I started to look at this history and realize violence is the norm in this society. Violence happened against the original indigenous people, violence happened against the African American people, and violence has happened to basically many groups of people. And if you look at it, even people who say, well, I'm a Catholic Irish guy, there was no violence against me. Excuse me, there were severe anti-Catholic, anti-Irish violence and hatred. So we really, and this gets back to this discussion now about critical race theory and, what do we study in our history? We have to look honestly at this history because this violence has been there, this hatred, this misunderstanding has been there. So I agree with Dr. Ding, we need to get out there and to look at this, think about it, have that be part of a sustainable life. A sustainable life means do well in your career, do well for your family, for your church, whatever. But part of that life means doing some activism to make the world better for everybody else. And that's what we're doing here on this panel. And that's what we do in our individual lives. I know for myself, when the George Floyd situation happened, I, like everyone else, said, oh my gosh, this is horrible. It was the irrefutable evidence of things that I knew about. I've done civil rights work in the Black community. I've been doing voting rights down in Mississippi and other places. I know that this stuff happens and it just was not videotaped. But when we saw somebody's knee on somebody else's neck and heard those cries, we all saw there was no mitigating circumstance. There was no other thing. It was one guy killing another guy and there was racism involved. So, and that's why I think many of us said we have got to address this. And I've been working with the Japanese Latin Americans for many years. The Japanese Americans got some measure of redress after World War II, but Japanese Latin Americans who were kidnapped from their homes in Latin America at the same time that Japanese Americans, like my family, were interned into camps. These Japanese Latin Americans have not gotten a full measure of redress. So I've been working with them. And in fact, at the University of Maryland last semester, I put together a panel where we brought Black Lives Matter people and Japanese Latin American activists, and we talked about the need for truth and reconciliation, about the need for redress, about the need to have a society where we help to make everyone whole. We can't say, let's just start the race, get set, go. Some people are not at the starting line because of forms of invidious discrimination that they've suffered. You look at the restrictive covenants, you look at all different things, redlining, things that have prevented some people from accumulating wealth. There are so many issues that have hurt people and that continue to hurt people, and laws that allow spousal violence. There's a lot of other issues to deal with. And until we acknowledge those and say we as a society want to address all of those issues to make people whole, that for me is the bigger discussion that we need to have about environmental justice. It's the personal environment we live in, as well as the global environment and the structures that create the world that we're living in. So I'll stop at that point.
Absolutely. And you described the intersectional nature of all of these issues so well, and the different aspects of both the personally mediated and institutionalized racism. So going on to the next question, does your AAPI identity factor into the anti-violence, human rights, social justice, and environmental justice work that you do? So Dr. Ding, can you start off with us?
Well, I would say from my discipline is business. So from a business perspective, actually, there are not a whole lot discussions about this. And they are definitely research studies and practitioners out there trying to connect or build on the legacy, asset, resources of AAPI to advance the either environmental costs, health quality improvement, and business in general. But so far, I don't think I've seen enough of efforts trying to address these issues from a human rights perspective. Now, I'm more a business expert and less an environmental expert or a health expert. But I can say this. So take health as an example. So in the public health area, there are certainly research about, so in specific communities, say AAPI community or Vietnamese community or Chinese American community, and how does these particular community suffer or affected by either environmental factor, work condition, or any of the predictor variables, right? Predictor variables. But because the data itself is not usually, the public data is not really comprehensive, meaning that we don't have disaggregated data set at a very high level. So it will be really hard to scale up those data, those kind of research. And Rose, you are public health graduate student, you know what I'm talking about. So it's harder to look into a cross-sectional, even longitudinal outcome of what's going on. And then the next question, as a researcher, we may be asking, so why do we even care about that? How does Vietnamese, Taiwanese, Japanese, and Korean Americans different? Well, if you assume there's no difference, sure, there's no need to disaggregate data. But everybody here today, I think we know there are tremendous amount of differences. And even within, allow me to just use one more example from health to illustrate this point. Even within the same community, same group of people, sometimes their experiences can really tell very different stories. Not long ago, just right before COVID, if I recall, there is a paper about Vietnamese, it's about nail salon workers in Philadelphia. And it's pretty much, it's a relatively small scale qualitative research, qualitative approach research. And they interview nail salon workers. And in their research, about half of the old Philadelphia area nail salon workers are female Vietnamese descendants. And then there are older Vietnamese, female Vietnamese nail workers, and there are younger ones. And the interview results come back very differently. Why different? The research cannot conclude. And this is a very small scale compared to a lot of other public health studies, like nationwide or at least statewide. Same thing with the business research as well, and same thing with public environmental research as well. So this is very small scale, and yes, it is already showing us that within the AAPI community, there are a lot of different things that we just don't know. And we are not talking about 50 years ago. We're not talking about even 10 years ago. We're talking about less than 5 years ago. And that's a fairly new research. And without these, so from high level data collection, disaggregated data collection, to a lower level, very intentional observation to specific phenomena and understanding of what are the either health factors, environmental factors, and business factors that contribute to the advancement of AAPI, specific AAPI communities, health welfare, environmental welfare, and economic welfare, then we probably will never be able to have a better picture about what we need to do.
Absolutely. Phil, can you take this question next?
Sure, if I could just unmute myself. In terms of thinking about my identity, as I've looked at Asian American history over the past 37 years, when I first got into this field, I had read literally everything that was available. There were a few things out of UCLA. There wasn't that much. When I taught my first classes, I literally had to go and get newspaper articles and try and find things to talk about. But as Dr. Ding points out, now there are these wonderful new studies coming out. We're able to disaggregate. We're able to look at each individual group. And that's wonderful, because as more people like Rose get into the field, and it's wonderful that you'll be spending a lifetime putting together the data that we can talk about. And I think that's really the key. I don't really identify myself as an Asian American. I am a human rights activist who happens to be male, who happens to be straight, who has family that came from white Anglo-Saxon Protestant background and from a Japanese American background. All those things were important to me, and I think it was important to get to know my own identity. Now I spend a lot of my time dealing with issues in a Portuguese-speaking area in Brazil, talking to people who speak an indigenous language. It has nothing really to do, actually, a funny story. When I was there helping to demarcate the land for some of the indigenous people back in 1996, I got in the back of a truck with about 12 other guys who had guns, who were afraid that we were going to get shot at by these fazendeiros, the people who were trying to take the land. And I said, well, thank goodness I got my video camera here. Nobody's going to shoot me. I'm a North American guy. And one of the indigenous brothers turned to me and said, but you look like us. So anyway, I guess we're all connected on some level. But I think having an important understanding of your own identity, knowing where you come from, what your people did. I can trace my ancestry back 14 generations on my dad's side, 8 generations on my mom's side. That gives me a certain sense of security, of awareness of who I am. When I first started at the Asian American Legal Defense Fund, I talked to some Vietnamese American people who came into the legal clinic, and I didn't speak Vietnamese, so I tried to speak to them in French. And I realized some of them were really angry. They wanted to use their broken English rather than their fluent French. And then I found out a lot of the Vietnamese hated the Japanese because of what had happened during the war. The Japanese imperial people had oppressed them. And likewise, there have, same thing with Koreans. The Korean Americans, I tried to talk to someone in Japanese, but no, they didn't want to because, again, for 40 years, Japan had colonized Korea. So I had to start to understand, we may look similar, but we have very different histories. And it's important as you deal with any person as an organizer, you really have to get beyond the stereotype, beyond saying, oh, this woman is part Filipino American, part something, you have to get to know that person, know a little bit about Filipino Americans. As I talked to Kristy, I know something about Filipino American history, but that's not enough. I have to get to know her and her specific experience. And I think that's really the key whenever you're dealing with environmental justice or any other issue.
Absolutely. I love that. That was so good. I just wanted to add on to that because I assume I'm going next anyways. Yes, I mean, I also come from like a mixed race, mixed cultural background. And I think that's why this question's a bit difficult for me because I feel like, I feel very similar to Phil, where I feel like my AAPI identity and experiences have definitely cultivated certain perspectives and even barriers in its own way for like how I've navigated myself in the world and had to explore environmental issues. I would just say that like the biggest thing that I've learned has been like storytelling and being able to remember that the ways in which I did feel like I could actually connect to the environment was mostly from my Filipino side, was from my Lola or my grandmother, who was very connected to nature, very much was like connected to the land. And I felt like my connection to her and being raised by her was some of like the beginnings of me actually caring about these things, because I grew up in a straight up suburb, but it was also just like super urbanized, and I just was not exposed to nature at all. I felt like in some ways I kind of grew up in my own like weird bubble where I was kind of like shunned away, and I didn't even grow up with like other Filipino Americans. So I was always othered, I was always felt like the other. And so I feel like for me, it was always just like figuring out. And then even when I went to the environmental space and tried to work on environmental issues, I again felt this othering. And so then when I also realized that my experience of isolation and feelings of othering and feeling like I couldn't fit into this box of what it meant to care about environmental issues because I wasn't raised to, traditionally recycle or hike or do all these things that I saw my like white friends doing, which is great, It was like one of those things where I just felt like I could never fit into that box. But I realized that was like a symptom of this legacy of colonization and gentrification and imperialism that has separated people of color from land, from nature, from their inherent connection to the connection that we all have, that our ancestors had. And due to these systems of extraction and white supremacy, as I wanted to name again, we've been divided from that. And so, in my work on Brown Girl Green, it's really been just a process of healing and trying to tell stories and try to bring people in who are trying to bridge that gap. Because ultimately, it's about getting people to remember that deep connection of understanding what is at stake. And in order to do that, there has to be this deeper meaning to it when people are trying to just survive day to day and put food on their tables, trying to pay their bills. But there's something deeper and more beautiful about trying to tap into caring about the earth, caring about the legacy we're leaving it. But in some ways that can be a privilege and is rooted in, the separation that I'm talking about. And it requires bringing more people into the room and discussing these issues and how we relate or don't relate to it, to be able to advocate for the resources our community needs. And so that's where I come at it with that, with my perspective and how I felt my AAPI identity led me on this journey that I am on today.
Absolutely. I love that you go into that deeper reason of why, whenever you were describing seeing your other friends, their traditional ways of maybe recycling, going more into that and the intersectional reasons of why do we recycle, why do we care, and bringing that back to our identities and our roots. So the next question is, are there any specific environmental justice issues affecting AAPI communities that you'd like to highlight, such as success stories and victories? So Phil, would you like to begin with this one?
I'd like to talk specifically about the work that the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund has done in New York and around the country. I haven't been the lead on some of these, but this is stuff that the group has been working on. We have a 5-part way of approaching these issues. We have free housing clinics. We deal with land use, anti-gentrification issues. We do community education. We do legal representation and referrals, and we do community organization support. And what that means is we don't see ourselves as the only group doing this or even the leading group doing this. I mean, there's a group like the Asian Pacific Environmental Network out in Oakland. There's a number of groups doing great work here. But I think that as we think about sustainability in our world, we have to think about sustainability as people and as organizations. How do we draw the Venn diagrams to overlap? How do we find ways to help each other grow? And I think the environment we've grown up in, where we're all scrambling to find this crumb of money that comes from some big foundation, I mean, I think people are not working together enough, and I hope that we can use this forum. I certainly am going to be reaching out. I've taken 5 pages of notes already from my 2 co-panelists here. I mean, I think we all need to learn from each other and find ways to work together and accentuate the strengths of our work and the work of our colleagues. So some of the things that we have done, we see environmental justice, like all of you do, as finding ways to have fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, including Asian American people, but other people. And we have to have looking at environmental laws, regulations, policies. ALDEF is a legal organization, so we have been particularly good at helping to bring lawsuits and to get groups to big development groups to acknowledge that, for example, when you are going to build something in a community like Chinatown, New York City, at the lower part of Manhattan, there's a lot of people who are there. There are a lot of small businesses. And so although we are mostly doing work with the seamstresses, the restaurant workers, all different people who've been there over the course of the almost 50 years we've been in existence, we also work with small businesses because we realize that these small mom and pop shops have issues that are very different from big corporations, big chains. If you come into Chinatown here in DC, there are street signs that say, that have Chinese lettering on them. You know, how do you say Starbucks in Chinese? Well, it's right there. They've been forced by zoning laws to write their name in Chinese. But meanwhile, almost all of these small family businesses are gone. And we have a Starbucks, we have a Walgreens, we have all these big things with Chinese names on them. So again, part of what we are doing is to make sure that a sustainable footprint happens in all of the communities. We've done work with people in Boston and Baltimore and other places to try and find ways to see what has worked to preserve the small community feel. And for our communities, we don't just want tourism. We don't want to just have an economy that is extractive or that is exploitative or just is a showcase. There are real people working in Chinatown. And I hope you all remember when we get back to doing stuff live in person, the reason why food is cheaper in some of these Vietnamese and Chinese and other restaurants is because somebody's getting exploited. Somebody is not getting a fair wage. Somebody's not getting the health care they need. Somebody's not getting the other things that you might take for granted. So always ask yourself, I know when I go into restaurants, I try to leave a bigger tip and usually directly to the wait person, because I want to make sure that some of the wealth I've been able to accumulate through my privileges goes to some of these hardworking people who I know are giving advantages to their children and building themselves into a better lifestyle, the way that my parents or grandparents did before.
Absolutely. Kristy, can you go next?
Yeah, I really wanted to highlight this fight that's happening in Hawaii right now. So my friend, his name's Daniel. I'll be putting links in the chat. Basically, they're fighting for a community farm right now in Oahu, and it's on native Hawaiian land. And basically, it's a community farm school that's basically going to, they have 90 days to prevent it from being sold to a developer. And they're really trying to raise funds for it because it's a space that's being used to grow food and teach the next generation on, like I was just saying, have that connection to the land and nature. And so I'll put links in the chat below, just because I think it's literally an environmental justice fight happening right now that's being dealt with by our community. And I would say outside of that, I would say getting involved with a variety of different AAPI environmental justice organizations. I'm a part of FACES, which is the Filipino American Coalition for Environmental Solidarity. We're always looking for people to join us. And I would just say beyond that, if you can support AAPI environmental, like sustainable brands, I'm always listing those on my platform, which is Brown Girl Green, which I'm sure people can check out and connect with me later. And I think, again, that's its own movement where it's like, you know, AAPI folks who are actually creating products that actually serve our community and aren't full of these toxins, and actually like helping us connect back to our roots in those ways too. And I don't think we talk enough about that, supporting small businesses and small business entrepreneurs. And so try to look out for that, for the people like the folks in this panel who are trying to change that conversation in every sector across the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Day?
Oh, thank you. Dr. Nash and Kristy, I think you guys are singing my music. So, in a business school domain, a lot of times we say, oh yeah, well, those non-business people don't understand us. They ask and want, but they underappreciate the power of market. But of course, the same argument can be totally turned around and come back to us. But what you guys are saying, small business in Chinatown and entrepreneurs finding new opportunities, that's exactly really a lot of the new breed of business researchers and educators and businessmen are trying to do, trying to find out if there are ways to use the market. Really, it's not business per se, it's really the power of the overall market, a very strong human society mechanism to push the welfare of a community or multiple community, or if not the entire society. So in that front, what I've been seeing is that there are an increasing number of the entrepreneurs that are really trying to take advantage of technology, increasing awareness of the opportunities and the problems we are seeing to advance our cause. And small things include, well, there are ghost kitchens everywhere. And ghost kitchens, we love them. The ghost kitchen, there's no such a thing as America. Nobody holds a monopoly of defining what a ghost kitchen is. But if you look at a ghost kitchen model, we actually see a lot of Asian American or ethnic-based ghost kitchen popping up everywhere. And ghost kitchen regulation from time to time could be tough, especially in urban areas such as New York City or San Francisco, because of the zoning code and all these other things. But in most of the countries, most of the places, ghost kitchen actually is a quite easy operation to happen, and it satisfies, well, economically it benefits the business owner, the entrepreneur. On the other hand, it also benefits or help the community to sort of retain their identity, or if not strengthen their identity with food or through food. And that's just one example. And then there are other nonprofit efforts, well, not exactly business, but nonprofit efforts trying to address what they have seen during the last 18 months or even longer, what a lot of people consider the system failure. What are we talking about? So during COVID, a lot of services used to be provided by government, social workers are not available or are difficult, even impossible to deliver. And those kind of needs and demands, they don't go away, right? Those needs are still there. If you need some sort of intervention is still there. They are, I would say it's a public-private joint venture cooperations, really trying to help those people with needs to endure the hardship or to make up for the loss of what previously was not able to deliver. And we have to admit that the best intention will not cure a very drastic shock to a system. And that's what we had. But moving forward, can we learn from the lessons? I think a lot of people are doing the thinking and trying to figure out, well, if something at this scale is happening, it will happen again, then can we tell ourselves that we are better prepared next time when this kind of things come around? And that, along with a lot of entrepreneurial efforts, maybe they are aimed to AAPI community, maybe not, but I think a lot of these actually at the end will benefit the AAPI community overall.
Absolutely. For this next question, I would like to start out with targeting actually more toward Kristy to highlight your work on creating culturally relevant content to engage new solutions to the climate crisis. So can you tell us more about your work and your platform, and then we can also open it up to the other panelists for similar strategies.
Yeah, I just want to say that like some of the most interesting stories and information I've ever learned about the climate crisis has been locked in academia. Like it's written in really intense language that of course I can understand because I got had access to higher education, but like a lot of that is not translatable, whether it be not translatable into other languages or it not be translatable to the average person. And so actually it kind of started like end of 2019. I've had Brown Girl Green going since around 2018, but around 2019, I started trying to figure out how could I take these really dense academic articles where I was learning such interesting new studies and research regarding the climate crisis, and how could I actually make it, pop it on social media. And so I would take like hours and basically take these huge academic articles and I would make these things called case studies. And a lot of those I put out in 2020 as well, where I would take a case study that I would either, find in an academic journal or I would even find in the news. And I would break down like, what is this article actually talking about? What's the subject matter? Obviously, I would have my own angle and story to it, which of course is like a part of social media. You're always trying to tell a story. So you can't be like super objective, unfortunately. There is some subjectivity to it. But with that subjectivity, you allow an opportunity for one perspective or angle to come out of such dense information. And so one example of that last summer, we took this case study that was specifically about how plastic pollution was impacting people in rural poverty, but like in the global South. And it was this really dense brief by this amazing nonprofit that I was partnered with at the time. And we worked together with this nonprofit to take their academic article and briefing they had on their website and to break it down into bullet points that would actually be understandable to an audience on social media. So to make it skimmable and also visually appealing. So I have a graphic design team and a creative team, and we didn't want to just have the information. We wanted to make it visually appealing. So that's like another part of it. Social media is all about catching people's attention, being able to get the story, but also get them to want to read the whole thing, right? Or watch the whole video. And so the case studies were kind of the beginning of my methodology to start figuring out, how do I keep making content like this that's taking really complex topics and giving people kind of the intro to it. So that way, if they're more interested, they'll dive deeper in, or maybe they'll ask questions and want to engage further. Because I think the issue is that people care about these things, but they don't have the language that maybe these scientists or these experts have. And so that doesn't really allow people to have, you know, the language to maybe even advocate for their communities the way they want to, or they might not even be able to know that there's certain organizations they should be donating to or supporting. And so I really view my content as a bridge and a translation tool for like really hard academic content related to climate issues, and also you know, being able to bring all of this amazing work that other people are doing, especially activist advocacy groups, and using like my privilege and my platform to like create traffic signals towards the work they're already doing. I don't try to like co-opt, I try to like bring people in as like a resource hub for everything. So yeah. Meanwhile, talking about my own personal experiences, so that way it's not like I'm just this talking wall either. So yeah.
That's incredible. And I do want to say, I personally love your platform. I've been following it for several years now. So I think the work that you do is incredible. And the communication that you do is so important for, like you said, translating it into action. Like, we don't want these publications to just sit on a shelf so someone can get another grant. That we need to see these changes at our communities at a local level. So Phil or Dr. Ding, did you want to add to this before we moved on to the next question?
Well, actually, I just want to say, Kristy, we need to talk, because business schools nowadays, the modern business school, well, if you think business school is sort of a hard-ass businessman wearing suits and walking to a boardroom of a poor private business and say, I'm buying you out and get out of here. You watch too many movies. Nowadays, the business school in our at least in the American education system, we really try to educate our undergraduate and graduate students that, well, you really need a society to be with you. So sure, we want profit. Businesses are profit. Without profit, you will not survive. That's for sure. Even when the profit is too small, you will not survive. You will not survive for long term. That's also for sure. However, without a healthy, vibrant community, society around you, your business is not going to do well. So that's the reason the whole group, starting from green and then corporate social responsibility, and then now sustainability, ideas really catch up, or business school finally catch up with these lexicons and internalize those. And one thing I think all of the business schools are trying to do these days is doing exactly what Kristy, you are just describing. Professors, we love to teach, we love to do research, we love to dig into data deep down and then figure out the hidden gems, hidden wisdoms, or hidden lessons learned from those data. But those lexicon, those terminologies sometimes are a little bit difficult to digest for most of people anyway. And for example, to me, I have my feel, and when I talk to my accounting colleagues, I will be scratching my head and say, okay, can you slow down and explain that in English? What do you mean? Because accounting, I know accounting to some extent, but that's not my field. So what Kristy, the bridging, the translation, if I may, of those works, I think it's universal in all of the fields, but in modern day business, because again, I'm biased, I'm a business school person, but I believe that there's a strong market power trying to drive business schools that way and drive the higher education that way, to that direction. So what you are doing really is important for all of the universities and academians. We need to talk about this.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I mean, it's funny, I've been doing something parallel to what Kristy did. I did work for many years with Healthcare Without Harm, which is a group, definitely look them up, Healthcare Without Harm. I don't have their website right here. And another group called the Environmental Working Group, EWG. They're the ones who, for example, when people are wearing lipstick, you don't realize there's lead in that. It's something that's not well regulated. And so here you are making yourself beautiful and you're killing yourself. So, you know, I did work with those groups over the years, but again, I didn't really think of myself as an environmental person, but it's true. I mean, Kristy really personifies where I hope we're all going to be going, taking the knowledge that Dr. Ding and I are doing, making it more public. I'm following in your footsteps here on my Facebook page. If you go there, you'll notice I just wrote a piece about restrictive covenants and looking at how these things that are put in the deed saying no blacks or Asians or Jews can have this house. And even though they've been struck down, they're not enforceable, it still creates this legacy of racism that we need to get rid of. And so as we think about this, about how this racism is embedded everywhere, all over society, and people say, critical race theory is raising issues that are not there. Well, excuse me, it's there. And we are the ones who are saying, let's take a look at it, not to hate white people, not to hate society, not to hate business people. We're here to say an honest reckoning is needed in order to allow all of us to feel good, for all of us to bring our whole selves to work, to community, to church, to whatever we do. Because if your mind, your body, your spirit are not all there, you're not going to have a sustainable future for yourself or your children or anyone else. So that's what I'm doing a little bit, trying to use social media. I'll print something about some issue, and then I'll put links in there. Because again, I'm not the God of knowledge about restrictive covenants or anything else. I will put the Wikipedia link there. I will put links to key articles that I find. I'm certainly going to look at Kristy's site now and see if there are things that I can post on about that. And again, this is that overlapping that we all need to start doing. I'm going to look at Dr. Ding's site, see are there things that he's doing that I can reference. Anything we can do as a multiplier, as something to help bring the knowledge that each of our colleagues, our brothers and sisters are doing important stuff. How can we bring that into our world and act on it? So I can't do exactly what Kristy's doing. That's not my forte. I know a little bit about graphics. I know a little bit about bullet points and how to do things, but that's not my main, that's not my core strength. But I can do a little bit to point people over there and say, hey, please look at her site, look at this Brown Girl Green. And at the same time, if I see things that I'm doing at the Asian American Legal Defense Fund, I'm going to talk to her and say, hey, maybe can you help us publicize something we're doing? Because the stuff that ALDEF has done, just for a little history here, in 1974, we had a big environmental law that looked at environmental impact statements. Whenever there was a building that was going to be put up, they had to look at the environment, look at the streams, look at the plants and everything else. ALDEF brought the first lawsuit in New York City to say environmental impact statements have to also look at the lived community where people are. And it was a very important change to the way you look at environmental impact statements, because it's not just steel, it's not just turtles, it's not just water, it's also people living in Chinatown, living in Little Saigon, living in any little community. You have to think about that. And we're not saying don't build big glass structures. No, we're saying build them, but be respectful of what's going on there and help to sustain it. We all need to sustain ourselves through business, through our families, through our communities, et cetera.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So we are definitely nearing the end of our session. So I wanted to give a last question. This is kind of your 60-second elevator pitch for words of wisdom that he would give for the next generation of AAPI activists or non-AAIP individuals who would like to fight with you on issues for environmental rights or against violence for social and environmental justice.
I will start 60 seconds. For anyone out there who's interested in advancing AAPI's causes, I would say start action, start trying. And if you fail, there's no, I am a business person, once again, I don't know how many times I've said this, but let the market decide, let the community decide. If what you are doing makes sense, then you will gather a group of people following you and or include you in their cause. And that's how human society have been worked together, the whole civilization formed that way. Now, if what you're doing doesn't make sense or misinformed, drop it and start something new, join another team. So but the key thing is take action, get involved, and engage.
I'll go. I would say that my call to action is just that, like, there's so many young people now that are fighting around these things, and that there's literally actions happening now. You don't need to start your own new thing. There's plenty of people who are here to help. Would love for you all to connect with me. There's so many people in my own network that I would love to share with you all. And I just think that, like, you're not alone in this. And eco-anxiety is real and we need to be there for each other. And young people didn't deserve this, but we're going to fight as hard as we can to deal with it. So, yeah.
I would ask the young people here particularly to think about what people are going to say about you 50 years from now at your retirement party. What are the 5 bullet points? And if you read obituaries of people, they say he went to this church, he went to this college, he did this thing, he enjoyed playing baseball, whatever. But think about what you want people to say about your life, because at my stage of life, there are people who have these, I woulda, I shoulda, I coulda, come on. Do that when you're younger. Think about the things that you want to do to make the world a better place. And that also means being grounded in yourself. Take time to learn about your own family, your own background, because everybody is either doing things that their parents tell them to do or rebelling against those things. So figure out what are some of those issues that are there in your own family and put them to rest. That shouldn't be what dictates. You should be your own person. You should be thinking about what you want to do with your own life. And then, do I need to get a graduate degree? Do I need to do something? Whatever it is, get yourself grounded somewhere. Because if you're not grounded in some place, you're just talking theory up in the sky. Excuse me, we got plenty of people doing that already. I like the idea of, Dr. Ding is immersing himself in the Baltimore area, dealing with his community. Kristy's dealing with her community, and then going online to build bigger community. That is the way to do it. Find a community, and then if you can eventually get out of there. Some of the stuff that I write on Facebook, I see it's going out to places I have never been and have never, I have no idea who these people are, but they are forwarding my posts. So that's all good. That's something I've done. But ultimately, you have to think about the 4 wins as you're doing things. Win for yourself, win for your own family. Make sure that you sustain your own family. I know of these martyrs I started with 40 years ago doing this stuff who didn't do enough to sustain themselves. And now they don't have enough money for their retirement, or they don't have other things. You are the most important person in your world. It's not selfish to take care of yourself. So take care of yourself. And then when you do something, win for the other person. Always think about how I can work with Kristy. If I do something that helps Kristy do better for her, then she is going to have a multiplier and help a lot of other people. She's going to pay it forward. So find people like Kristy, Dr. Ding, Rose, others who are doing good work and invest in them. That means your good work gets multiplied. And then also find ways to build the planet, not by looking at the planet as a whole. Find a particular project. So when I do something, I'm down in the Amazon, I'm not there to save the world, but I'm helping a particular community preserve their language and their culture. And they know how best to preserve their part of the Amazon rainforest. I don't know it, but by helping them have a sense of grounding, helping them to preserve their homes and their lifestyle, I'm making my small impact on the Amazon and by extension, the world.
That was an excellent elevator pitch. I feel very inspired by all of you. This was a really great way to end the panel with all of your words of wisdom. And I know at the beginning of this panel, when we were chatting, we were saying how it's very inspiring to see these spaces of AAPI voices. I know as someone who does identify as AAPI at the beginning of my EJ journey, I feel very fulfilled listening to this session and taking notes of the work that you're doing and actions that I do want to follow along. So thank you so much for the actions that you have provided and your insights and lived expertise that you provided for this panel. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
Thank you, you too.